The fascination with the high-fat diets is that you get some immediate weight loss and that sort of thing. But I testified in front of the USDA Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, and there were so many of these low...
That was recently, wasn't it?
A couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And there were so many of these low-carb advocates there.
Yeah, how was that? Because I've just seen the footage surface. I've only just seen it. I've seen Dr. Greger there. Who else was there?
Susan Levin from PCRM was there. We were pretty well represented, I think.
And how did that stack up against the ketogenic community?
The ketogenic people were angry, for one thing. I think they're constipated, which is why they rant and rave and scream. But they were all talking about short-term results. And when it was my turn to get up and talk, I said, listen, if you take a look at high-fat diets, low-carb diets, the measurements short-term show that the benefits are there. People lose weight and their numbers come down. But if the only thing we're going to do is consider short-term benefits, there are a lot of things that cause people to lose weight and have good biomarkers. One's cocaine addiction. I've never had a fat cocaine addict in my office, and I've never had one with high cholesterol or high fasting glucose levels. Now, I'm being facetious, of course, but the point is if the only thing that counts is short-term, a lot of things are short-term good, bad, and long-term, because it takes a long time for cancer to develop in response to a high-fat diet, for example, or a high-protein diet. A plant-based diet, low in fat, high in fiber, is the one consumed by the healthiest people on the planet, like the Okinawans, who didn't get the memo that high-carb, starch-based diets are bad for you. So I strongly encourage the committee to take a very strong stance on this issue and recommend a whole foods, plant-based diet. Thank you very much. And the other thing, the high-fat people, low-carb people were bashing carbohydrates. One actually said that anybody who's diabetic is actually carb-resistant, which is patently ridiculous. I mean, that's a ridiculous statement to make. And I said, if carbs and starch are so bad for you, 2 billion Asians didn't get the memo. And the Okinawans certainly don't understand what their poor state of health probably.
What do you think they'd say back to that? Correlation doesn't equal causation?
Well, this was to the committee.
Okay, but what do you think is just the typical argument they make in response to people like you, right?
Well, they basically say, well, you know, the Okinawans eat some fish. They don't really have much to say back from a scientific standpoint. But and when people refuse to look at successful...
The one thing, sorry to cut you off, one thing they do, because I really want to make this a conversational thing that these low-carb people can tune into and be like, they're incorporating all viewpoints. Mm-hmm. What they do say back is, well, there's never been a vegan population. So plant-based health experts always talk about the blue zones and stuff, but each one of those blue zones did contain a certain amount of animal protein. Mm-hmm. So how do you reconcile the two?
Well, I think I think that's a valid point, but really the common denominator of all of these populations is it's an extremely high carbohydrate diet that's mostly plants. Okay, and
so it's diametrically opposed to what they recommend.
Right. So let's take the vegan issue off the table, because I don't think anybody had any hopes that the Dietary Guidelines Committee was going to come out with a vegan diet. We weren't there to promote that. We were there to basically say the science is quite clear that a plant-based diet that's high in carbohydrate and includes starchy foods is best, and that's true. So if you take a look at this you and I feel very strongly about being vegan, but if you take that off the table and just look at dietary patterns, we're still right.
Mm-hmm. Does the ketogenic community have any evidence showing that you can reverse diseases with a low-carb diet? And the plant-based community, on the other hand, do have that data in the form of early stage prostate cancer, I believe.
Heart disease,
type 2 diabetes.
Some form, yeah. So there's quite a bit, and we have some data on inflammatory bowel disease, and you're seeing more coming out with other diseases too, not just the big three.
Sure. So we've got
the louder and crankier these keto people get. Like I really was blown away by how angry and adamant and rude the keto and low carb people were. The first doctor who was the low carb person got up there and she said, the dietary guidelines are a joke. This whole thing is a joke. And in a very angry way. And a lot of them were like that. They had to be told to shut up and sit down because they went over their time.
Is that a lack of integrity, or are they just are they misinformed?
I feel like they all got together and said, they are misinformed, but I feel like they got together and they said, we're going to go in there and we're going to tell them, because they all kind of have that attitude. And see, again, silver lining girl, right? So what do I think about that? I think they did us a great favor, because had they gone in there and said something like this, and because they didn't ask.
Well,
my opinion.
we could argue their case better than them, which you're about to do.
Right. Well, here's what they could have done, and they would have gained some traction. Maybe we shouldn't be so dogmatic about fat, and there's a range of fat intake, and not only were they angry, they all told the same story. And here's the story. All of my patients were eating a high carbohydrate diet and exercising an hour a day, and they all were still sick. And then I put them on a high fat, low carb diet, and they all got well, which is just kind of remarkable to think about it. I wonder where all these great eaters who exercise an hour a day are, because they're not coming into our office. Seriously, look at the data for them. It's just ridiculous. So they were patently misrepresenting. I think they were easy to counter. And they actually did us a favor, because I think that by the end of the day, they just did not seem like very reasonable people.
So how many plant-based proponents compared to the ketogenic?
Oh, I think 2 to 3 times as many.
Cool.
And then there were some. I'll tell you what, the guy who was the most entertaining said that what they should do is come up with a macronutrient diet that would be high fat, low carb. But then propose that people could do carnivore, paleo, they could do any way that they do it, and vegan, plant-based. And then, this was his rationale for doing it, then the guidelines committee would not have to make any industry group angry, because everybody could qualify. And I thought, well, that's an interesting proposal. Instead of saying we shouldn't have these conflicts of interest interfering in very important health-related issues, let's come up with a method to allow the conflicts of interest to continue so the beef industry is not upset. I mean, it's just bizarre.
That is bizarre. Sort of like how the USDA in 2015 said, like, eat lots of fruits and vegetables, but when it came to meat, the messaging was like, restrict the amount of saturated fat. It's like a tacit way to please everybody.
Because nobody goes to the grocery store to buy saturated fat, so nobody knows what that really means. They need to be specific, and I've testified about that previously. If what I was saying was not right, and if it wasn't threatening to them, they wouldn't be doing these things to me now, would they?
Sure.
So we're striking a nerve. And that goes to what you said earlier. Are we going to win this? Yeah, and that's what they're worried about. That's what they're worried about. Because if they really thought that I was some, inconsequential bug that they could step on and move on and didn't have to worry about, that's what they would do, but that's not what's going on. They're very worried about people like me and Peter Bregan and others who are doing this type of thing, because it does threaten their monopoly and their livelihood and their trillions of dollars every year in business.